I found out on a Tuesday. Not from him. Not from her. From a receipt, the specific, mundane kind that falls out of a coat pocket when you're hanging it up, the kind that has a hotel name printed at the top and a checkout time, and a room charge that doesn't match any business trip I'd been told about. I stood in the hallway for a long moment with that receipt in my hand. The coat was still half on the hook. The house was quiet. Dinner was on the stove. I put the receipt in my pocket. I finished making dinner. I set the table. When David came into the kitchen, I handed him a plate, and I sat across from him, and I ate, and I said the things you say at dinner. How was your day? Did you call the insurance company? There's more if you want it. And I watched his face while he talked, and I thought about the hotel name at the top of that receipt, and I thought about whose name was in the room next to his. Because I had recognized it. That was the part one didn't say out loud. The reservation was under a name I knew. A name that had been sitting at my mother-in-law's Thanksgiving table for 6 years. A name that belonged to the woman my brother Daniel had married in a garden ceremony in June of 2019 while I stood in the second row and cried because I was happy for them. Melissa. I didn't cry that Tuesday night. I want to be honest about that. Some people, when they find something like that, fall apart immediately, and I understand it. Grief moves through everyone differently. But what moved through me that night was something quieter and colder. It settled somewhere in my chest like a stone dropping through water. No splash, just the slow, certain descent. I cleared the table. I washed the dishes. I went to bed and lay there in the dark next to David, who fell asleep in 12 minutes the way he always did, and I looked at the ceiling, and I made a list in my head. Not of grievances. A real list. Practical. What was in my name? What was in his? What we owned together? And what I had brought in? And what would need to be addressed? I had been a financial analyst for 19 years. I understood how assets moved. I understood what documentation looked like, what it was worth, and how timing mattered in ways most people never think about until it's too late. I had 1 week before I needed to decide what to do with what I knew. I used it. The first call I made was to my attorney, Carol Simmons, on Wednesday morning from my car in the parking garage at work. I told her what I'd found. I told her what I suspected. I told her I wanted to understand my options before I said a single word to David or to anyone else. Carol asked good questions. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Okay, let's talk about what you have and what you need." That was exactly what I needed to hear. The second call was to my accountant. The third was to a private firm I'd looked up the night before. I went to work. I came home. I made dinner. I sat across from David every night that week, and I watched him, not with hatred, not even with anger yet, though the anger came later in its own time. I watched him the way you watch someone you are studying, the way you look at something you thought you understood, and are now seeing clearly for the first time.
He hadn't changed.
That was the strange thing. He was exactly the same person I had married, same habits, same expressions, same way of laughing at his own jokes a half second before the punchline landed, same way of leaving the cabinet above the sink open when he was done with it. I had lived alongside all of these things for 11 years. I had thought I knew what they added up to. Now I was sitting across from the same person and doing entirely different arithmetic. Whatever he was carrying it comfortably, which told me something about how long he had been carrying it. By Friday, I had a clearer picture. The hotel receipt was one data point. The firm provided more. Nothing dramatic, just a documented pattern of things that, placed side by side, told a story I could not interpret any other way. The timeline went back 7 months. 7 months of something I had been sitting in the same room as, eating dinner across from, making plans with without knowing. I took the documentation to Carol. She reviewed it carefully. Then she looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "You've done your homework." I wanted to understand what I was walking into. I said, "This changes some things," she said, "depending on how you want to proceed." I told her how I wanted to proceed. On Saturday evening, David sat down across from me at the kitchen table, the one we'd bought together at an estate sale 9 years ago and refinished ourselves over a long weekend. And he said, very carefully, I think we need to talk. I let him talk.
He was sorry.
He didn't use her name, which I noticed. He said it had been a mistake, a terrible mistake, that it was over, that he would do anything, and on in the particular language of someone who has rehearsed this and is hoping the rehearsal is enough. He was remorseful in the technical sense. He checked all the boxes. I listened until he was finished. Then I said, I want a divorce. He looked surprised, which surprised me. Renee, I've already spoken to an attorney, I said. I'd like to keep this as straightforward as possible. I think that's better for both of us. He was quiet for a moment. Then,
Okay.
I think that's probably the right call. Said like a man who had already made peace with this outcome and was relieved to have it named. Like a man who had been hoping I would be the one to say it first. We agreed to meet the following week to begin the paperwork. I called Daniel that night, my brother. I thought he deserved to know what his wife had done, and I thought he deserved to hear it from me rather than from a lawyer's letter or from Melissa herself on her own terms. He was quiet for a long time after I told him. Then he said, Are you sure? He said he needed time. I said I understood. I meant both things. After I hung up, I sat on the edge of the couch in the living room for a while without turning on the lights. The sky outside was going dark, that particular deep blue before it goes fully black, and I thought about Daniel at his garden wedding and the way he had looked at Melissa when she walked toward him, and how I had thought, standing in the second row, that whatever else happened in my life, I had at least been in the room for that. Now I was sitting in the dark thinking about how a single person can occupy two completely different places in your memory, and how one does not erase the other, and how that is one of the harder things about being a person. I did not fall apart. Not as pride, as a fact. I had things to do, and I did them. I did not fall apart. Not as pride, as a fact. I had things to do, and I did them. The following Thursday, I walked into the offices of Hendricks and Lowe wearing a navy blazer and carrying the leather folder Carol had helped me prepare. The conference room was on the 4th floor. Long table, floor-to-ceiling windows. Water glasses already set out. David was there when I arrived. His attorney beside him. Carol beside me. David looked relieved. That was what I noticed first. The particular relief of a man who believes he has already won, who has looked at the shape of what's coming and decided it is manageable. He gave me a small, careful smile when I sat down. The smile of someone trying to be decent about a difficult situation. The smile, I realized, of someone who had not read the full document Carol had prepared. His attorney began to walk through the standard division framework. The house, the investment portfolio, the joint accounts, all of it laid out in the orderly language of a process both sides had agreed to. I let him get through about half of it. Then Carol leaned forward and said, Before we go further, there are some additional items we'd like to address. David's attorney looked up. Carol placed copies of the documentation in front of everyone at the table. Clean, organized, labeled by date. The hotel, the timeline, 7 months of a pattern, made visible, made paper, made permanent. This jurisdiction recognizes fault as a factor in asset division, Carol said, in the same tone she might use to discuss the weather. Given the documented circumstances, we're requesting a modified framework that reflects that. The details are in the addendum. David's face had changed. The relief was gone. In its place was something I had not quite seen from him before, a sudden, thorough understanding that the situation he had walked into was not the situation he had prepared for. His attorney asked for a moment. They stepped out. I sat at the table and looked out the window at the city below. I was calm. Not the calm of someone who felt nothing. The calm of someone who had felt everything already, earlier alone, in the right order, and had arrived at this room already on the other side of it. When David and his attorney came back, the conversation was different. The modified framework was not what David had expected, but it was fair. Carol had made sure of that, because fair was what I wanted, not punishment. I didn't need to take more than I was owed. I just needed what was mine to be clearly mine. We signed what needed to be signed. David was quiet for most of it. At one point he looked at me across the table. A long, unreadable look, and I held it without flinching, and then I looked back down at the page in front of me. Outside on the sidewalk in the thin October light, Carol put her hand briefly on my arm. "You did well in there." "I had a good attorney," I said. She smiled. "You also came in ready. That matters more than most people think." I drove home a different way, through the park, which takes longer but which I do sometimes when I need the extra minutes to arrive somewhere ready instead of just arriving. The trees were gold and rust, the particular light that only comes for a few weeks each year before it's gone. I had the windows down. I thought about the kitchen table we'd refinished together. The estate sale, the long weekend, the two of us covered in sawdust arguing about the stain color. I'd wanted something lighter. He'd wanted dark walnut. We went with dark walnut, and it had looked exactly right, and I'd told him so, and he'd been pleased about it for weeks. I was keeping the table. That had been specified in the paperwork. A small thing, but it was mine to keep, and I knew what it meant to me, and that was enough. Some betrayals change you, not into someone harder or colder, but the way a room changes when you rearrange the furniture. Everything is still there. The same light comes through the same windows. But the view is different and the space works better, and you wonder, quietly, why you didn't move things around a long time ago. I had been underestimated in that room. Both of them walked in expecting a particular version of me, the one who was too hurt to be prepared, too emotional to be organized, too blindsided to have done the work that mattered. I had let them think that, right up until the moment I didn't. That was the part one had pretended. Not that I didn't know. Not that I didn't care. I had pretended to be only what they expected, and I had used the space that pretending created to become exactly what they hadn't seen coming. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment with the engine off. Then I went inside and made myself a cup of tea and sat at the dark walnut table and looked at nothing in particular, and I let the quiet settle around me, and I thought, this is mine now. All of it. This is mine.